The name StrategicRX is no accident. There are a lot of parallels between treating patients in, for example, remote settings, first responding, and companies, not only companies in distress, but also companies in hypergrowth, companies in stretching themselves, stretching their limits and their structural coherence while they reach the next levels of success. My entire approach to diagnosing companies, to understanding what's going on, draws a lot from medicine and from wilderness first aid and first response in emergency situations and medical emergency situations. Whenever we approach a patient in a, let's say, wilderness scenario where we are further than 1 hour away from definite care, meaning hospitals, clinics, or professional help, we have a certain sequence of how we approach a medical situation. It is very structured, and it ensures that we're not missing out any important point, especially because we need to keep this patient alive and bring them back, transport them, evacuate them back to definite care. So we want to make sure that while we diagnose, we're not missing anything critical that could be a life-threatening condition. And the same applies for competence, right? We can bring in consultants and fix our sales teams and train the sales team. And then they reach their 130% target achievement 2 months in a row. Amazing. But did anybody check the costs of goods sold, the cost of customer acquisition, marketing, sales commissions? Did we see that the contribution margin is negative? Did we pay attention to the fact that we're actually paying double the amount that we're actually getting in revenue for each customer? So we're literally a charity that pays people to be a customer. If nobody looks for this, if this is not part of the structured dashboards and reporting, you'd be surprised even the mature companies that sometimes is not in real time available. It takes requests and sometimes weeks until this information gets available to decision makers. If we do not pay attention to those life-threatening conditions, then we might end up treating symptoms, we might end up fixing problems successfully while the patient bleeds out, while the company goes bust and faces a very challenging financial or even sometimes legal reputational situation. That informs my entire approach about how I work with companies. I'm not satisfied with the surface problems that I'm being told about in the first couple of sessions or meetings. I want to dig deeper. I want to be immersed. I want to be on the scene, in the field, shoulder to shoulder with those who actually work in the company, with those who take decisions, with those who experience the market, the customers, the suppliers. This is where the ground truth lives. This is where reality lives, where context lives. And you can only take good decisions as a leader if you understand context, if you understand what's going on, and this allows you to anticipate what will go on, and it allows you also to anticipate the consequences of your own decisions. Back to wilderness first aid, back to our patient in a wilderness scenario. If I face multiple patients, right, so-called mass casualty event, I have to make decisions about who I treat first. And you might think the obvious patient would be the one crying, shouting, yelling, screaming, bleeding all over the body, running in my direction. Intuitively, that would be the first patient I would treat, correct? Very wrong. It is actually the exact opposite. A patient who screams is breathing. It means they are alive. I'm way more concerned about the person laying motionless, leaning against the wall, because that person could be in shock. That person could be bleeding out right now. And if I now spend time on the screaming patient who runs my way, I lose the critical 5 minutes in which I can still stop the bleeding for the other patient that actually is in a life-threatening situation that already has lost a lot of blood. So the parallel to business is obviously crystal clear. We have a lot of those screening patients. Our sales results are going down the hill. We didn't hit our sales targets for the last 3 months. The head of sales is such an unpleasant person. Always comes to the office and is grumpy. We need to do something about this. We need to fire him, replace him. Like we get so obsessed with the optics. We get so obsessed with the outer appearances. Right? It's like our marketing campaign didn't work. Instead of actually focusing on the substance. What does our contribution margin look like? All the sales results that we're getting in. What do we actually make any profit, any money from this? Marketing. We can complain about the failed campaign, but what are actually the systems behind marketing? In what marketing channels are we investing? Do we even track that? How do we assess the effectiveness of our marketing budget? We can always go many layers deeper, and we want to move away from the symptoms and from the obvious and actually look at those non-obvious candidates, these non-obvious patients. The real risks for the business are most likely not the failed marketing campaign and the 3 months of not hitting your sales targets. The real risks for the business are the exploding salary costs or the office rent in a new market that was opened that doesn't produce any return on investment. The real risk might be a legal issue with one customer. Has nothing to do with the 3 sales sales months. So the real life-threatening conditions are always silent. They will not announce them. You need to dig for them. You need to look at the patterns. You need to literally investigate. But for this, you need to be on the ground. So once I prioritize my patients and I start treating them, I have a very clear sequence of how I go about them, right? I first check for life-critical conditions. That's the airways. I want to make sure that nothing obstructs the breathing, nothing obstructs the airways, that there's no item lodged in the airways. So I need to remove that immediately before I even spend any time on doing anything else, because that's a life-threatening risk. Next is breathing. Is my patient actually breathing? And then I will look at circulation. What's the pulse like? Do they actually still have a good pulse, or did they lose a lot of blood? And now I will run into a problem that they will stop. Their heart will stop beating. So I need to take those decisions now, and translate it to companies. It is our runway. It's our burn rate. It's our financial situation. The first conversations often, end up with finance. Like, where are actually the life-threatening conditions here? If we do not fix them now, and we get busy for 6 months with the sales team, and we get busy another 6 months building a customer success function until we hired the people, onboarded them, trained them, connected that with sales, built proper working rhythms, proper working cadences, hired a head of customer success. And those 6 months will be lost if within the same 6 months we're actually bleeding money and we're actually running out of cash to pay the salaries. And now after 6 months we will build a brilliant and wonderful customer success function, and we have to do a mass layoff and let go of 200 employees. This is why we need to start with life-threatening conditions always first. Next, I go through a head-to-toe exam. And you can literally think of this like the checking of the operational departments of the company. So my head-to-toe exams, it's obvious. I check for wounds. This is the saying, right? No blood, no wounds. Like, I want to check if I have any wounds that might not be visible. Again, because they could lead to the patient bleeding out. Now, in operation or in a company context, head-to-toe is literally the entire org chart. The finance department, the sales department, marketing, customer success, product, the C-level, HR. Again, different company sizes, different company scales have different additional departments, operations, delivery, etc. It really depends. It's context specific. But all of those departments have leaders most of the time, or at least people in charge, people who feel responsible. And people who have certain thoughts about this department, who run it a certain way, who have certain assumptions about it. You could see customer success as we solve problems and we keep our existing customers happy and we do whatever they tell us to do. Or you could see customer success as we are a revenue generating function and we do upselling, renewals, and retention, and we ask for referrals. There are always worldviews and beliefs, like people understand their own job in a certain way. And this is where I always start. I first want to understand the person running it and the person who built it before I look into the symptoms. Because if I understand the source code, the mental source code of the person who built it or who runs it, I can already anticipate where the issues would be. What is the philosophy behind how this department is run? That gives me a lot of information. It helps me to not waste time going into details, but actually focus on strategic priorities and focus on the real issues. Now, if I go through operations, I of course also want to understand how processes work, how do handovers work, how do interdependencies work between those departments. Especially in the commercial engine, you will have handoffs points from marketing to sales, from sales to onboarding, from onboarding to customer success, depending on, of course, the unique context. And what are the communication channels between those operational departments, right? Like, is there like a weekly meeting cadence? Is the CEO triangulating, meaning talking with every department head individually and not sharing the information? All of this I want to know now before I want to hear the sales team didn't reach their targets. Sales also is a consequence. But you really need to differentiate between root causes and symptoms. Sales is a consequence of marketing and product working properly together. Do we have a product that solves problems and it adds value? Does our marketing communicate this properly to the market and to potential buyers? Sales is the third level that comes on number 3, right? And so before I go into symptom world, I want to understand the source code, I want to understand processes, and I want to understand the departments as such. That's my head-to-toe exam. Very sequenced. Also, what I want to understand is my patient responsive, of course, right? Something I would obviously do before the head-to-toe exam, or also in the process of the head-to-toe exam, which is my patient responsive? Is literally, is the leadership responsive? Can the leadership face truth? If we bring up the results of the diagnostics, will there be defensiveness? Is there disinterest? Or is there actually a serious commitment to wanting to understand in order to genuinely, properly fix things for the betterment of the company? Their responsiveness is also important. What is the strategic intent here? Are we running a day-to-day operation and just do good and hope that good things will happen? Are we trying to impress venture capitalist investors and get the next funding round and just do whatever looks good? Do we want to build a generational business? So we're taking decisions for the long term. We buy real estate right now, which doesn't make any sense for our business operations, but it makes sense for 15 years down the line. Do we want to be acquired by another company, by a big player in our industry? And are we making decisions based on that? That strategic intent is also extremely important. Of course, it can come also at a later stage in the diagnostics process, but it helps us understand the entire context. Is the strategic intent even connected to what the operational departments are doing? Does finance even know about that? Is the product team even aligned with that end game that the company pursues, or that the founder or the owner pursues? Another important principle is when I do my head-to-toe exam, I never want to sit, because my patient most likely will of course lay on the floor, lay on the ground. I never want to sit behind the patient, meaning that they would see me 180-degree mirrored, right? Like when I sit on top and above the patient, and start testing the arm, No, I always want to make sure that I'm in front of the patient. The patient can look into my eyes, can look into my face, and I speak with the patient while I'm doing the exam, of course, given that they are conscious and responsive, and I explain what I'm doing. It's extremely important. And it also translates back into companies. Any feedback, any realities, any context that we understand while we go through this exercise, while we diagnose, while we investigate, also needs to be fed back to those departments, because it's also a mirror of clarity for them. This is not like correcting school homeworks as a teacher and trying to find the flaws. Like, business is a living organism. Feedback is absolutely essential. Like, getting an external mirror can be extremely effective in making adjustments and in also gaining more clarity over one's own function. We then move on to what is called a sample history. Without going into too much detail, now I'm speaking to the patient, right? And I go through symptoms, I go through any allergies that they might have if I'm facing an illness, not an injury. I'm looking for basically, do they have specific pains? How high is the pain? What does the patient self-report? Did they take any medications, right? And I want to make a decision ultimately about, can I evacuate this patient safely? I also want to check for potential spine injury, right? Because then the transport could be very dangerous. And during this time, I'm really discussing with the patient, let's call it on a strategic level, right? And this is where we really go into the history of the patient in the sense of the company, right? Allergies. When was the last time there was a change? How did that work out? Is there a negative reaction to even the idea of projects? Is there negative reaction to certain topics? I'm always curious, and I'm always paying a lot of attention to when certain topics are brought up, let's say a specific market, or when we talk about contribution margins, or we talk about profitability, is there an awkward silence? Does the energy shift? Does the body language shift in that moment? It can tell me a lot. And again, this is not to expose the CEO or the owner. This is really to also mirror back to the CEO and owner. Look, like, here is actually a huge area that apparently we have an allergy to, where the organization has an allergy to. Also, if the leaders have an allergy to it, then the organization will have it, because they will most likely not allow any conversations about it, sometimes subconsciously without even being aware of it. And that mirror is important to make adjustments. And if I understand what the history was, and now we go into all kinds of things, right? We also, of course, need to include in our diagnostics the vital metrics, which is I'm actually testing now real numbers for like what exactly is the pulse and so forth. What is the breathing rate? And this is literally me looking at dashboards and reports and studying the data, right? And this is another layer to the whole mix. And now we understand the history, including the data history, right? And now I have a very strong foundation of also understanding what happened in the operational, including with the operational part, how the departments are being run, the strategic intent, the end game of the founders, and on top of this, understanding the external environment, right? Which in case of wilderness first aid and medicine would be, is the patient in a burning house? Is the patient under a cliff and there are rocks falling down, right? Like, what is the external environment too? What's the industry like? What are competitor moves? What are regulations looking like? How's the government feel about certain products or services? Could there be a moment when they regulate them away, or where they take? All of these are things that I need to anticipate. It now gives me a full picture. And in wilderness first aid medicine, we would now go ahead and create a so-called SOAP node, SOAP, in which we basically collect our subjective insights and our objective insights. And then based on those, you make an assessment, right? We come to a conclusion. And that conclusion then leads to a plan on what we do about it. What's really important is sometimes organizations tend very far into the subjective side. Everything is about gut feeling, about anecdotes, about what leaders share with each other during lunch break. Other times, organizations tend extremely into the objective side, where it's about data. We make data-driven decisions. Typically, it's a coping mechanism in response to having been very impulsive before. That's kind of the remedy, but it goes into the other extreme. Subjective and objective realities and inputs both have a lot of validity. They are both legit. You just have to understand them as what they are. You don't confuse subjective inputs, opinions. You don't confuse this as truth. And if you have a relaxed attitude towards those by understanding, it's not absolute truth. We can see it as what it is, and it has its place. It enriches what we have in terms of objective data, in terms of the pulse, the metrics, the reports that we're looking at. And sometimes it can even help us understand that in our objective data, we are missing a lot of things. No dashboard is perfect. No report can capture everything. And the same like with science and research papers, you actually want to understand the methodology. How was this data even collected? And it's the subjective, the qualitative feedback that often can give you actually clues. We not only have a problem with the actual situation, but also with our sensors, with the way how we measure it. And we probably need to adjust a lot in the dashboards themselves in order to get to better objective truth. And our assessment, which is also really important, because we are not doctors in wilderness first aid. This is our assessment. This is not the absolute truth. Only a doctor can make an actual diagnosis. So we collect this and we see it as a working version. This is our approximation to reality. And in business, this is also very important, because if you come into a company as an external, there will be things that you will not know. Even if you dig deep, and even if you go, sometimes the organization doesn't even know. Sometimes things surface through the interaction with you that were not known before, and where we didn't even know that we didn't know. And many times we just have to accept that our view, our map of reality will never be absolute. Reality is not static. Reality moves. Our map of reality is a snapshot of the moment, a comprehensive one, and we need a comprehensive one in order to take better decisions. But it is just a snapshot. 6 months later, 3 months later, sometimes even 2 weeks later, the map of reality has already shifted. And now new decisions will be necessary, different approaches will be necessary because the situation has changed. And this is extremely important to keep in mind, also to translate from medicine. We cannot walk around hoping for somebody to relieve, as leaders, right? As organization, yes, relieve the burden from us to take decisions, relieve the burden from us of the risk of being wrong. And sometimes we do this with data-driven decisions. We hope that this guarantees that we would now take decisions that are foolproof, that cannot go wrong. There's no guarantee. And it's the same with going and doing a diagnostics. We always have to understand there is a lot of unknown factors when dealing with reality. Business is not the same as building a building. Building a building can be quite predictable. With a 5 years plan, you know exactly which materials you need, how much manpower you need, how much time you need. You can plan a lot of things quite well in advance, unless of course it would be any disruptions to your supply chain or to the operations or regulations. But overall, it's very predictable. Business environments, companies are dealing with constantly changing environments, constantly changing situations. Just the fact that your top performer was poached by a competitor and is now leaving the company in 2 weeks. You cannot foresee that. And there are so many unknown factors, and it is always helpful to keep that iterative lens and to go into a mode where you constantly analyze and diagnose reality as an ongoing process. It's not a one-off. This is extremely important to understand. Also, if I assess my patient in that situation, 3 hours later, once I made it to the hospital, the pulse will be different. The breathing rate will be different, right? The pain that the patient self-reports will be different. I have to check again for airway obstruction. I have to check again for the breathing. I have to check again for the circulation. I need to keep a close look. I need to stay close to the patient, to the signals, right? And it's the same with companies. As organizational leaders, it's literally our role to be the internal doctors of this company and to constantly assess, to constantly be on the pulse of things, measure, track, and develop plans. Understand that subjective inputs, including and especially from our frontline employees and those who actually interact with customers, who interact with the market, are as valid and important as the objective dashboards, which also sometimes can have strong limitations because the way we collect data might be flawed, right, or might not be inaccurate. So understanding this, we take an approach of, we always have a version 1 of reality, then a version 1.1, a version 1.2, version 1.3, and we keep iterating and iterating and iterating. And each iteration, we become more precise. We start building more systems for data collection, both quantitative and qualitative. And the better our map of reality becomes, the more we can anticipate and the more we can actually take good decisions, especially when it comes to interventions, surgical interventions, like the ones that my company is doing, where we identify the clear strategic leverage points and the hidden structural risks, and then go in and work with the company for a time-bound period to fix those problems, shoulder to shoulder in the field on site with the leaders of the company. And then after moving out, also creating the artifacts and the means, the procedures to maintain that change and to keep going, to give continuity to that change after the intervention ends. All with the goal of longevity, with the goal of enterprise value, of long-term value generation, and building proper businesses based on business fundamentals instead of chasing investor optics. It's all about our responsibilities as leaders to build companies that are valuable, to build companies that also live up to their potential, to their fullest potential, and that live up to their responsibilities to their employees, suppliers, investors, shareholders, stakeholders, and customers. And understanding what's going on is the first step of identifying the most strategic and most leveraged approaches of making that happen.